Good morning, everyone. This is Alexander Mathai, and this is Weight of Crowns 3. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for bringing us to this point. We thank you for the season of change that we are about to embark upon. We thank you for all those that have come before us, that have taught us the lessons that we needed to learn up until now. I bring you this stick of correction, and I offer it to you, and I pray that it would only be used in the way that you desire and determine. Do not let us ever misuse our office of authority or leadership. Let the children see that there is a right way to do things under the proper authority when you are put first. Take this and these words and let them be an offering unto you, so that everything will be done according to your will and not my own. Amen. Weight of Crowns 3. We were talking about David and Hezekiah before and their relationships with their heirs. It's important that we not only focus on what we are going to do during our administration, but what we want our children to be able to hold on to after we are finished with our tasks. The focus of today is going to be more about the first principles of some of the conflict that happens between leaders and leadership styles. For those of you that know the story of David, you know that Saul was anointed by Samuel, and Samuel came from the lineage of Eli. Eli was a priest that was well off in years, and the story of Samuel begins with his mother, Hannah. Hannah was barren, and she was the second wife of Elkanah, who was just a regular guy for the most part. But they were they were people that went to the temple every year. Elkanah had two wives, Peninnah and Hannah. Peninnah was very fertile; she had many children, and she was kind of a bitch about it. So she rubbed it in the face of Hannah, who had no children, that she had many. And in that culture, in that society, having children was a sign of honor and dignity. The way that America has treated childhood and childbirth and family and nuclear family structure is not the way God intended it. And you see every other culture that is superior to America in literacy or mathematical prowess or critical thinking or anything like that, they look at family structure very different than America does. And they look at leadership very different than America does. So the feminist ideology was created to kind of undermine the civil rights movement of the African American community. A lot of America's downfall is because they were trying to cover up the blemish of slavery and Jim Crow, among many, many other offenses. Um, and so these secondary movements, like the gay rights movement or the feminist movement, or the trying to equate anti-Semitism, and Semitic cultures include all those Middle Eastern cultures. Remember, Israel only came around in 1948. There were people living on that land before, which is what that Middle Eastern conflict is all about. So Palestine is a Semitic culture. So if you say anything that's anti-Palestine, which most mainstream media does, that is in fact anti-Semitic behavior and anti-Semitic speech. So all mainstream media must be canceled. So Eli was the priest, and the priest was kind of the religious leader, the singular religious leader, religious figure. Think of like the pastor of a town. In the same way a town would have a sheriff, the priest was kind of the spiritual sheriff. So Eli was the spiritual sheriff at the time, and he was well off in years. And sometimes what we notice is that when leaders get older, it's a lot harder for them to be as involved with the daily activities of their constituents. and that was the case with Eli. So Eli had two sons. They were corrupt. You can read the details if you want. So the Lord is not going to allow corruption to continue just because of nepotism. And so when we see things about nepotism in the NFL with the Sanders family, that's merely a reaction force to the nepotism that's been happening in the 1% for centuries. All the Vanderbilts and the DuPonts and the everybody that's in the Hamptons every summer planning all kinds of special events. That's nepotism, and so that's not the way that God ordains leadership. Um, so there had to be a new priest that kind of restarted a healthy lineage with communication with God. So that's where Samuel came from. So Hannah was barren and was praying very fervently for children. And one day she prayed so fervently that Eli thought she was drunk in the temple, but she wasn't. She was just praying that if the Lord gave her a son, she would dedicate that son back to the service of the Lord. And so she eventually had Samuel, and uh, Samuel actually became Eli's apprentice. So think about this. Eli, who laughed at Samuel's mother, thinking that she was a drunken lunatic, actually had to be the mentor to her son, who became his apprentice and far surpassed him in history. So God is more than capable of taking you out of a position where you have been ridiculed and mocked and putting you in a seat of authority over those very individuals. Now, don't expect that outcome. He may not call you to that outcome specifically. We have to be really, really careful with these Disney fairy tale endings. Okay, we are responsible for our own life. We're responsible for our own actions, and we cannot rely upon a great spaghetti monster in the sky to magically make everything all right. Okay, sometimes it's up to us to do battle. But if spiritually we understand that the battle belongs to the Lord, and we move prayerfully and we move under that line of authority, like we said before, I can't jump out of this window and ignore the law of gravity, right? So I'm never going to start my day without acknowledging that it is the Lord that allows all these things to happen, including any gifts that I have to be executed for anyone's benefit, including my own. Samuel was 9 years old, and Eli, he had the experience where the Lord spoke to him, and Eli gave him good advice at the age of 9. Okay, and that was probably Eli's best event in his life. If you think about it, he kind of peaked at that point. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes we have leaders that have great moments. T.D. Jakes had a message a long time that was named "Favor Isn't Fair," and that stuck with me for a long time. Um, and so the the Lord can certainly use anyone to deliver His word, and and it can be a word of encouragement. So we cannot close the door on any leader that is in that office. However, we have to have a personal relationship with the Lord in order for us to receive that spirit of discernment that the Holy Spirit gives us. Okay? Um, uh, my role, I believe, is to lead Texas Movement International as a company. I don't believe my role is priesthood in any way. However, I do take the lessons from kingship and priesthood in order to be a good president of this company. And if we have a board of directors or at some point maybe a CEO in the future, but I'm not sure. Right now, if we can make this organization as densely strong as it can be as an individual, as a one-person company, then when we scale, there will be no structural change and there will be no concern for um, any danger for any subsequent partners or employees. And remember, we have several verticals that have all different kinds of applications where I'm not going to be the most qualified to lead that direction of vertical. Okay. So keep that in mind and pray on your own to see if your life's purpose aligns with our mission. Okay. And if it does, maybe the Lord will allow our paths to cross in the future. So Samuel was the one who anointed Saul. Now, Saul was anointed because the children of Israel no longer wanted to live under the rulership of judges, which is what the organizational structure was at the time. I spoke about I compare my mother to Deborah, a fierce, strong woman of the Lord who had spiritual authority, but at the same time understood spiritual hierarchy. So when Barak, who was the leader of Israel's army at the time, did not want to go to battle without Deborah, she said, "That's fine, I'll go with you, but because of this, your glory will go to a woman." So that's what I think about after my mother's departure. I'm very sad that she's not here to witness Hero's growth and um, us taking our seat at the table of history. But I know that she completed her task with regards to her purpose. And if I am to lead the children of God into battle at any scale, even if it's just one person myself, then I need to do it without the help of Deborah. Um, even if she was here, I would have been satisfied for her to rest her feet and report my progress daily to her. But the Lord's will is superior to my own. Saul was a partially obedient king. He was instructed to fully destroy the Amalekites, even the livestock, the cattle, the king, the the priests, and everybody. He was instructed directly by the Lord through Samuel to destroy it completely, wipe it out. But he kept some choice livestock. He kept some things. In the same way Ananias and Sapphira kept a portion of the property, Saul kept a portion for clout. C-L-O-U-T. Dallas is very familiar with clout chasing. When the Lord instructs us to do something, we must do it completely, and we must do it immediately. When Samuel confronts Saul, the famous verse that my mother would say to me all the time is, "Delayed obedience is disobedience." So the Lord does not look at our partial effort with any kind of appreciation or gladness. Okay? He considers it disobedience. And I'm always very upfront in saying that I have not been fully obedient to the Lord. But my heart, I strive for my heart to always be tuned so that my conscience will be readily pricked if and when, that deviation occurs. Because I would much rather he correct me and reroute me versus trying to make it on my own, which is what you see my opponents trying to do, covering up um, their fraudulent behavior and their sins. And who's under pressure now, right? All I have to do is wait because the pressure is on them now. So be very, very mindful of the weight and the danger of not completely obeying the Lord. And usually the Lord speaks to you through your individual conscience. You don't need a divine, manifestation of anything. Okay? Um, Couple of things. Faith is the opposite of fear. So, you know, Peter and Jesus had conversations that were kind of comical sometimes. Peter was always trying to do too much. He cut off a guy's ear in the Garden of Gethsemane right after he fell asleep when Jesus was praying. Jesus asked Peter to stay awake with him 1 hour when he was praying, when he needed him the most, and Peter fell asleep. But when the soldiers came, that's when he wanted to show off and pull out his sword and cut an ear off. And at Jesus' moment of greatest stress, when he was betrayed by one of his disciples, the disciple that was in charge of the money, when that disciple betrayed him with a kiss, that's when Peter decided to show off and cut off the ear of a soldier. That's worth thinking about. We need to be very careful who we call our friends, because they will reveal themselves in their character in times of crisis. So when Samuel confronted Saul about his disobedience, he said, "The Spirit of the Lord has departed from you." And that was very early in the reign of Saul. But Saul reigned 40 years, the same amount of time as David. So while Saul was still king, Samuel had to go and anoint a son of Jesse. Jesse had 8 sons, only 7 of which he brought in front of Samuel to select from. And Samuel saw Jesse's oldest son, who was tall and handsome, similar to Saul. And Samuel said in his mind, because he's still a human being, remember, Samuel said, "So surely this must be the king that the Lord has selected." And then the Lord immediately spoke to him and said, "Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." So you see, even the priest of God, whose not a single word ever fell to the ground, he had thoughts that were contrary to what the Lord had in mind. But because of his relationship with the Lord was easily able to redirect those thoughts into the appropriate action. So there was no harm done. So when we submit to leadership in the appropriate way, a proper authority structure, it's very easy to reroute. All of us have some type of GPS, whether it's Apple Maps or Google Waze or Google Maps or something similar. When we make a wrong turn, if we turn one street too early or one street too late, the GPS can very easily reroute us back and save us from any long-term damage. We may have missed a few minutes here or there, but it's negligible usually most of the time. And sometimes rerouting can actually teach us a new route and show us a new back road that we didn't realize before. So we have to submit to the omniscience of God and the providence of God, even in our human frailty. So David was anointed very early, but unfortunately that's where his troubles began. So he had killed the lion, he had killed the bear when he was tending the sheep, but he still had to kill Goliath. He still had to lead the 400 savages. He still had to act crazy in front of another king. He still had to ask for the sword of Goliath, even though he beheaded Goliath with that very sword. Lots of ironies in David's life. And then, of course, he played the harp for Saul, and Saul threw a spear at him. And Saul hated his own son Jonathan because of Jonathan's allyship with David. And Jonathan had to speak in code to David and say, the arrows are beyond you, so that David could run away. That is the burden that kings have to bear. And then eventually Saul used the force of his army to hunt for David wherever he went, because old kings that no longer have the hand of God upon them are often afraid of change. And it's not usually change they're afraid of, it's the loss of power. Because the loss of power is the loss of their shield, the shield they've been using to cover up their own sins and blemishes. We all have to, and physical therapy and massage therapy will teach you this. Tom Myers can attest to this. Pain and trauma is stored in our tissues, our fascia especially. And a lot of times when you feel pain during a deep tissue massage, it's because tension and fear has been stored through trauma that you've experienced in your life. And so when you apply pressure, especially when on the laying of hands by someone else, you may notice that you go over certain points that are tender, but that's because that tension, emotional tension, has been stored in your body. So a lot of times the diseases you have are stress related, and the inflammation and the mucus development that Dr. Sebi talks about come from spiritual and emotional stresses. So fasting jumpstarts the physical detox, but prayer and deep internal meditation. Don't feel the need to subscribe to the Western white Anglo-Saxon Protestant version of Christianity to speak to the Lord. Speak to the Lord because remember, you're made in the image of God. So you have a right, just like a walkie-talkie, to directly communicate with God about your life. Okay, for a long time, people couldn't read because the Bible was written only in Latin. Are you saying that the illiterate villagers and the peasants weren't allowed to speak to the Lord? There's no medieval peasants that are in heaven right now? I don't think so. Okay? Change is inevitable. Order must be respected from first principles. Elon Musk loves to talk about first principles. The only first principle that matters to me is that we are intelligently designed by our Creator. They may be able to clone sheep. They may be able to clone human meat. Mr. Beast is talking about all types of chicken being manufactured and things like that. And all the, African holistic healers love to be vegan and all that type of stuff. Our grocery stores have high quality meats that come from good farms. Who knows? Okay, I give my body to the Lord and I trust Him to help me with that because we're all undergoing the same pressures. But first principles for me is the Creator's in charge of everything, and my job is to follow my owner's manual. My job is to subscribe to that purpose. So the order that God has instituted, that has worked for many centuries, needs to be continued. And in patriarchal societies where the man respects the role of the woman but does not allow his own role to be diminished, is where society works best. And in our home, when things were operating at maximum efficiency, my parents had good spiritual intimacy, and anything that happened inside their bedroom, my brother and I were not privy to. So whether they were arguing or they were in a good place, that's not my business because that's not my pay grade. My job was to be academically sound, be spiritually sound first and foremost, which we laid the foundation very early for that. And that doesn't mean perfect. Okay, kids? You don't have to be perfect, but your mind needs to be focused on what's most important. Michael Phelps used to say, from this year to this year, 8-year stretch, I never missed a practice. That's not what training is about. Training is about your mind being focused on you reaching the pinnacle of your essence, the pinnacle of your being. Okay? I'm 37 years old. I'm far superior athletically now than when I was 27 or even 17. Okay? The only difference now is mass and weight. And a lot of that has to do with stressful outside situations. Okay? So remember that as well. Finally, we learn abuse from our abusers, and we'll go through this, we'll flesh this out as we continue, okay? David, Hezekiah, Eli, we're at point 3 out of 10 on this. We've got a few more things to go with regards to Weight of Crowns. This is an important leadership series that I think a lot of you will be able to pull from and make your own versions. And I would love to see what your versions are, because this is just how I look at it. 37 is not old enough to be talking about memoirs, okay? But I do believe it's old enough to be talking about memoirs from childhood, okay? So that's why I'm doing it at this point, because you guys are the future, and one of you is going to take my place. And it's important that you start preparing for that role right now, if that's what you truly believe the Lord has called you to. And when that time comes, I'm going to pray publicly that I'm ready to hand that off to you at the appropriate time. Okay, so you're not going to have any challenge from me if the Lord has truly chosen you, no question at all. In the Iraq War, there was a place called Guantanamo Bay, where it was there was a lot of pictures of huge amounts of abuse to Middle Eastern looking people, which is criminal now that we realize that they were kind of props used, and it was kind of an organized 9/11 was an organized thing. Very, very dangerous for those people that did that. Things like sleep deprivation and starvation are often used as forms of abuse in prisons, because the body needs sleep to reset and spiritually survive. Starvation, um, fasting is an optional thing. You're not supposed to be forced into fasting. Okay, so you Malayalis, you remember that as well. Okay, you fast at the level that you're able to do it. If it's 1 meal a day, great. If it's fasting from social media, great. If it's fasting from coffee, great. If it's fasting from sugar, great. If it's fasting from meat, great. If it's abstaining from sex, if you're in a relationship, great. Okay, but you need to speak to the Lord, and you need to let your conscience dictate that. But you do need to challenge yourself. Okay? So don't take the easy way out, especially if you're looking for a role in leadership. Okay? The abuse can also be the removal of love or sex. So if you're in a position of authority, mothers-in-law that came from very harsh Eastern patriarchal societies will often ruin their own marriages through passive aggressive behavior and the denial of sex to their husbands because of the enforcement of celibacy from outside societies. You know that he will receive immense shame if he is seen to have an affair. So you manipulate his behavior and his leadership and his wallet by withholding sexual access from him. Um, I think the Lord is going to forgive affairs and cheating in those situations, or at the very least be a little bit more lenient about it. Because just like the man is more physically strong than the woman is more emotionally strong than the man. It's easy for you to obtain sex because you have the valued asset. It's difficult for a man to obtain sex because he has to establish his value. Okay? So you manipulating him with your body is not going to be seen kindly by judgment. Financial abuse. Okay? This is what happens in banking. So there's no reason for Chicago to have only one black owned bank and it be African owned. Chicago is one of the greatest historical meccas, and I use that word respectfully, of African American culture. We should have several black owned banks on the south side, several black owned banks on the west side, non-divine, non-affiliated. As long as you can meet the compliance requirements, reasonable compliance requirements, that should be available. Finally, regulation. We are regulated by the laws of nature and the laws of conscience. Beyond that, increased, complex regulation through legalese and all kinds of progressive laws, whether they are maritime or whatever. I don't believe the Lord has called us to live under such scrutiny and slavery. Things are important, basic things like speed limits and not driving under the influence. Those are good things. But conscience needs to dictate these rules. And believe me, in my organization, conscience will dictate our rules. And if there is unjust policy in Texas Movement International, I am open to that feedback as leader. And I will instruct my successor to have the same open door policy when it comes to feedback for unjust policies. I think that's a good stopping point for today. But remember, each of us is a king and a priest in our own body. So, follow first principles. Remember the abuses from your past. Detox yourself from those abusive practices so that you don't continue them in the next generation. And always remember, the opposite of fear is faith. Don't be ruled by fear. Be ruled by faith. This has been Weight of Crowns 3. We'll see you next time.